Hi, I'm Stephanie Strange. Want to hear something scary? Aya was feeling nervous about staying with her aunt, her Oba Asami. It had been months since they had last seen each other, but her parents had a business conference to attend to, so they drove all the way out to the countryside to drop her off. When she arrived, Oba was thrilled and welcomed her with cakes and hugs. But the sweet treats were difficult to enjoy with the creepy stranger lingering in the background. It was Oba Asami's new boyfriend, Mosu. The reason she assumed she hadn't seen her Oba in so long. He was tall, pale, and looked much older than her Oba. Mosu gave Aya a sly glance at dinner, which made her squirm in her chair. Getting ready for bed, she saw Mosu sneaking out of the guest bathroom. While Oba was tucking her in, Aya told her that she was sure her aunt's new boyfriend was not happy she was visiting. Her Oba said that was nonsense. He was just quiet and shy due to his artistic nature. When Aya's Oba left for work the next day, Mosu was supposed to be watching her. After Oba was gone, he shoved past Aya and locked himself in the study. She paced back and forth, waiting for him to come out, but he never did. Not even to use the bathroom or to eat. So Aya fed herself and waited for her Oba to return. The next day was the same routine. Aya was unsupervised, so she explored the backyard. She realized there was a high window that looked into the study. She shoved a heavy flower pot under the window and climbed up as quietly as she could. On her tiptoes, she pulled herself up to peer into the window. There was Mosu working away. He had craft materials and straw strewn all about. It looked like he was piecing something together. Dolls. Suddenly, he froze and stopped working. Aya held her breath. Then he picked up a nail and drove it right into the straw doll's heart. Then he snapped his head toward the window and stared directly at Aya. She leaped off the pot, ran to her room, and barricaded herself inside. Counting the hours till her Oba returned, she couldn't stop thinking about what she saw. It looked like he was making wara ningyo dolls, similar to voodoo dolls. In Japan, they're mainly used to ward off evil, but in the wrong hands, they can also be used as part of supernatural rituals, with the dolls themselves representing a curse. When her Oba arrived home, she practically had to break down Kuso's door. Through tears, Kuso recounted what she saw and told her Oba she was worried for her. Her Oba told her not to worry. Mosu loved her and would never do anything to hurt them. It was all just a mix-up. That night at dinner, Mosu couldn't even look at Kuso. He just seemed out of it, like he was in a daze. Just one more night, Kuso kept saying to herself, just one more night. Later, she laid in bed with her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She listened for any little telltale sounds, and she jumped up when she heard a bang on the front door. Creaking her door open just an inch so she could listen, she recognized the voice immediately. It was her father. She charged out of her room, and when she met his eyes, she knew something was wrong. Where was her mother? Her father gently explained her mother had a bad heart attack and was in the hospital. A horrifying thought pounded in Kuso's mind. It's those damn dolls. She brought her family to the study to show them the project Musa was working on. There, laid out on the desk, were 3 straw dolls. One with the face of Kuso's father, and one with the face of her mother, and one with the face of Kuso. Oba Asami was shocked. What did she mean? And why was there a nail in the heart of Kuso's doll? Upon examining the doll closely, they saw the human hair weaved into the doll. That must have been what Musa was doing in her bathroom that night, taking hair from her brush. Only it wasn't hers. That brush belonged to Kuso's mother. While they stood dumbfounded in the study, they heard a car start. Oba Asami looked out the window and saw Muso driving off. Kuso was relieved he was finally gone. But when Oba Asami returned to the room, her eyes were wide in terror. They asked what was wrong, and she said, "Muso left, but he took my hairbrush with him."
Kimura-sensei always loved taking his elementary school students on field trips. However, on this particular trip, things took a wild turn. As the students were heading back on the long bus ride home, they began feeling restless. At first, it was just paper airplanes hitting Kimura-sensei's head. But then the students started getting up and jumping over seats. Kimura-sensei realized he needed to take action and do something about it. He promised the kids some spooky stories if they behaved, and they quickly sat back down. Kimura-sensei began with the Tale of the Monkey Nightmare. Every time he finished a story, they begged for another. And Kimura-sensei happily agreed to tell more stories, and the students sat mesmerized, hanging on to his every word as he told the story of the Nuke-kubi and the Shoromogo and the Yuki-onna. Then suddenly, one student shouted, "Tell us about the Gozu." The bus fell into a silence as eager whispers filled the air. Excitement buzzed among the students, their eyes wide with anticipation. They yearned to hear the band story, hungry for the thrill it promised, in hopes of unraveling the mystery behind its terrifying content. Others looked terrified, including a student named Yui. The color drained her face, just thinking about the horror stories she had heard about the scariest story. She wasn't alone. Several of the other children were scared. A small boy even began to shake. It was alleged that anyone who heard the ghostly tale would be filled with such dread. They would quiver violently for days, then either be traumatized forever or die from panic, having been literally scared to death. So many people had been affected by the story that the original manuscripts were destroyed with only a couple fragmented copies scattered across the land. Kimura-sensei claimed to know the story. Though he couldn't find a complete version, he managed to piece together enough accounts during his studies. Just as he was about to begin, a whimper escaped Yui, her eyes filled with tears, and suddenly the teacher snapped back to reality, realizing he couldn't frighten the young children with such a chilling tale. He promised not to utter a word about the Gozu, the terrifying cowhead creature. He knew it was simply too overwhelming for them, and he should have known better. After an hour on the bus, a few of the students grew restless once again, and one mischievous troublemaker initiated a chant amongst the others. "Cowhead!" And a few others joined in. Just as the third chant began, Kimura-sensei swiftly rose, signaling for them to hush and take their seats. He promised to share the forbidden story if they remained quiet. Before he was able to complete the first sentence of the story, Yui and some of the other frightened students shouted, "Stop! Don't tell us!" as they hugged one another, crying. But the teacher didn't stop. His eyes turned black and expressionless. His body was taken over by a force as he spoke, not allowing him to stop even if he wanted to. Sinking back down on the seat, Yui curled up in a ball and covered her ears, desperate not to listen, but some of the words broke through. There was a small forsaken village in the middle of nowhere, and archaeologists were trying to find out why it was abandoned. They dug up a terrifying skeleton with the head of a cow and the body of a man. The investigation led them to discover that years ago, the village had been put under a spell of starvation. Everybody in the town was dying of hunger. After devouring the livestock and their horses, they moved on to their pets, dogs, cats, whatever they could find. After no food was left and people were starving to death, one day, a peculiar figure walked into the village, the Gozu. This terrifying creature had the head of a cow and the body of a man, but the villagers weren't afraid. They were starving and started attacking him, eventually brutally killing him. They tore at his flesh, ripped his body to pieces, and then ate him. Hell rained down and That was the last thing Yui heard before she began screaming loudly, so she was unable to hear any more of the terrible story. About an hour later, Kimura-sensei snapped back to reality. To his horror, he realized that the bus had crashed and flipped into a ditch. The medical staff had pulled him and most of the students out. But sadly, the bus driver lay lifeless against the steering wheel. It was truly a chilling scene. Yui stood out from the chaos even when everything else was in turmoil. She was unharmed and aware of everything around her. While many students suffered broken bones, concussions, and foaming from their mouths, she was terrified, upset, and panicked. Nonetheless, she maintained her composure and courageously shared her account with the police. Yui revealed that she had managed to block out parts of the incident by screaming. Kimura-sensei went over to try to comfort her, but pushed him away with a stern look on her face. "You're not my teacher," she whispered. She was aware that her sensei seemed back to normal, and the other students were not fazed or perhaps even noticed the black inhuman eyes of the Gozu that possessed her teacher that day, an image she would never forget. But she couldn't share the feeling that at any moment, he, the Gozu, may return and raise havoc yet again.
It was my first summer studying abroad in Kyoto, Japan. I always found myself captivated by the rich culture. Its fascinating elements had always allured me, and finally being immersed in it made me realize its true beauty and uniqueness. During my trip, I had the pleasure of staying with the Nakamura family. The friendly parents were fluent in English and even had a son named Yodo, who was my age and agreed to show me around. The food was amazing, and the Shinto shrines we visited were so beautiful. But thanks to Yoto, I was able to become part of his friend circle, and on most weekends we would go to the fashion district and hang out. One of my favorite things from those days was our weekly mini slumber parties. Made me feel like I took part of my home with me, as we had an American-style slumber party with pizza and movies and a couple of friends who would come over every Friday night. And the boys would stay in Yoto's room while the girls stayed in mine. Now, on this particular Friday night, I decided to spice things up by sharing stories about Ouija boards. My friends chuckled at the revelation, and one of them brought up Hitori Kakarembo. But Yoto silenced him, not eager to hear the tale. Nevertheless, the friend reshared the story against Yoto's will. He described a game of hide and seek where at the stroke of 3 a.m., the objective was to outsmart a stuffed animal possessed by a ghost. Now, I laughed at how absurd this was, but Yoto wanted nothing to do with it. Despite his concerns, the others were eager to play. So we watched from the sidelines while they played on. Now, I didn't mind, especially since Yoto was one of my hosts and wanted to keep me safe. As the night dragged on, one of the girls reached into her backpack and took out this dusty old stuffed bear. I offered some rice from the kitchen, and Yoto reluctantly handed them scissors. We watched in eerie silence until the clock struck 3 a.m. Within minutes, the two boys had cut open the bear's stomach, removed the stuffing, and refilled it with the rice. Pointing with the scissors, they asked again who wanted to play. Yoto pleaded with them not to continue the game, but no one listened. I again declined out of respect for Yoto. One by one, our 4 friends pricked their fingers, drawing a few drops of blood, and then adding it to the rice inside the cavity. Once everyone had participated, the boys sewed up the teddy bear with the red yarn, wrapping it with the remainder. Next, they needed the tub. Yoto sat frozen, so I stood up and showed them to the bathroom. We piled in and they filled up the tub, poured in salt, then put the bear in the water. They ran to hide in my closet as I sat next to Yoto on the bed. He was sweating at this point, looking quite unwell. The 4 came out of the closet, returned to the tub, pulled out the bear and yelled, "Got you!" in Japanese. Then they stabbed it with the scissors, leaving the bear on the ground. They went to hide again, this time in the living room behind us. The lights were off, making it fairly dark. Everyone was silent, and that's when we heard it. The scissors were being slowly dragged across the floor. Suddenly, the 4 players flew into a panic, grabbing a glass and gulping the liquid. Yoto explained that they had to hold salt water in their mouths for protection, but as 3 of them stood there with their mouths filled, there was none left for the 4th player, Ayoto. As he began to yell at the others who had used up all the salt water, the sound of the scissors grew closer. Ayoto ran towards the kitchen to refill the glass, but as he disappeared, we heard him scream. Then came what sounded like flesh being torn. Yoto leaped up and ran to turn on the lights. Ayoto was laying on the floor, deep gashes all over his torso. The scissors protruded from his abdomen as he bled out, and the teddy lay next to him. The other players, with their mouths still full, crawled over to the bear and spat the water onto it. Then they wept in disbelief. What we had witnessed didn't make sense. Within a week, I was being sent back to the States. As the car pulled up to take me away, I had said goodbye to the Nakamura parents and hugged Yoto. I asked him if he was okay, and the last thing he said to me was, "Just because we didn't play doesn't mean the game is over." Then he walked away holding those same scissors in his hands. Hitori Kakarembo never ends. Thanks so much for listening. Like and share if this video gave you the chills. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell for notifications. See you next time.